The Dark Ages, a period so shrouded in mystery that we believe nothing of importance happened. But what if I told you that everything you know about this dark era is a carefully crafted lie, designed to hide a truth far more dangerous than we could ever imagine? For nearly a millennium, Europe was plunged into what historians call the Dark Ages. But what if this darkness wasn't due to ignorance or stagnation? What if it was a deliberate erasure of a far more advanced and powerful civilization? A civilization that, for reasons still unknown, had to be silenced. The truth of the Dark Ages has been buried for centuries, not by accident, but by those who controlled the flow of knowledge, the very people who now hold the keys to history. And what they've kept from us? It's not just the past. It's the very foundation of who we are today. In this documentary, we will unravel what the history books won't tell you, how a massive cover-up shaped the world, erasing entire chapters of knowledge and rewriting the past in ways that still affect us. We're not just questioning what happened. We're going to reveal who decided that the truth should never come to light. Prepare to uncover the shocking reality of the Dark Ages, where nothing is as it seems, and history's biggest cover-up begins to unfold right before your eyes. We're standing on the edge of uncovering history's darkest secret, and we need you to help us bring it to light. If you're sitting there intrigued by what you've heard so far, imagine the power you'll hold once you see the full truth behind the veil of the past. But we can't do it without you. To reach 1,000 subscribers, we need a movement, a community of people who refuse to accept the official story. Every like, comment, and share is a step closer to breaking through the lies they've been feeding us for centuries. There is a time in history that never truly existed, a time deliberately erased from our memory, hidden beneath layers of lies so thick that the truth no longer even seems possible. For nearly a millennium, a great power controlled not just our faith, but our very perception of time, history, and knowledge. And those who controlled history controlled everything. For centuries, you've been told that the Dark Ages were a time of ignorance and superstition. But what if I told you that the darkness wasn't from ignorance? It was imposed from the outside, engineered to keep the truth buried? The truth that could rewrite everything you know about civilization, religion, and science. The world as you know it, the timeline you've been taught, the people and the events that shaped your understanding, has been manipulated. What was erased? What was hidden so carefully that for centuries no one dared ask questions? What was buried beneath the lies of the Dark Ages? Lies so potent that even the greatest minds in history were forced into silence? You think you know history, but ask yourself, why has no one ever told you about the strange coincidences that line up too perfectly across centuries? Why were entire libraries erased? Why were some scholars hunted down? And why do ancient texts hold truths that contradict everything we've been told about the Dark Ages? Tonight, we reveal the secrets that the world's most powerful institutions have kept from you. From ancient manuscripts found in the Vatican's deepest vaults, to the hidden maps that show a Europe completely different from the one we've been taught. What if the Dark Ages were not a time of ignorance, but a deliberate attempt to control the greatest minds of the past? What's really been hidden from us? Who controlled the flow of knowledge and why? And what would happen if we uncovered it all? The answers lie in the past, locked away by those who would rather let us stay ignorant. The question is simple. What was history's biggest cover-up? Who was behind it? And why has it remained hidden in plain sight for so long? As we begin this journey into the secrets of the past, the truth may not be as you expected. The world's most powerful institutions have never wanted you to know this. We've been fed a version of history for so long It's hard to believe that everything we've learned could be a lie. But the greatest cover-up in history isn't a conspiracy. It's a series of carefully constructed narratives designed to keep us from the truth. And now the time has come to uncover what was never meant to see the light of day. What follows isn't just a journey through forgotten history. It's a journey through a history that was stolen, manipulated, and locked away. Over the next few hours, we'll unveil the documents, the artifacts, and the people who tried to expose the truth. We'll reveal how the church, political powers, and secret societies work together to construct a version of history that has shaped every aspect of our modern world. This is just the beginning. The truth awaits. History doesn't just fade away. It's erased, carefully and deliberately wiped clean by those who fear its truth. For centuries, the greatest minds have told us that after the fall of Rome, humanity entered a period of ignorance, a dark age. But what if that darkness wasn't a natural consequence? What if it was engineered by design? We've been told that Europe fell into intellectual ruin after Rome's collapse, that knowledge was lost and society regressed into superstition. But who wrote this story? Who decided that the brightest minds of antiquity would be left in the dark? And more importantly, what did they want to keep hidden from us? The truth is not just that history has been altered. It's that we've been taught to believe in a version of history that was manufactured, created by those who had everything to lose by revealing the truth. But the greatest mystery isn't what was lost. It's what was deliberately removed from the record. There is evidence that the so-called Dark Ages weren't the ages of ignorance they were portrayed to be. In fact, the very people who controlled the timeline, those who curated the history we know, may have erased the greatest achievements of human civilization. These were not dark ages, but forbidden centuries, where the very existence of advanced knowledge was concealed and rewritten. These forbidden centuries, why were they wiped from the historical narrative? What was so dangerous about the knowledge that remained hidden, locked away in vaults, censored by those who sought to keep it buried? This isn't just history. This is a controlled timeline, manipulated to keep us from understanding who we really are, where we came from, and what we could have achieved. Tonight we begin to uncover the threads that tie the present to the past. But the truth isn't as simple as one empire falling or one dark age descending. The real story, what truly happened, is hidden behind centuries of carefully constructed narratives. And it's not just about Rome's collapse. It's about the deliberate obscuring of knowledge that would have shattered everything we've been told. Imagine this, an ancient map found in the heart of Europe, showing the Americas long before Columbus. How could this be? A mechanical clockwork device that predates its known inventor by centuries. Why does it exist in the timeline we've been given? And what does it tell us about the powers who control that timeline? The fall of Rome and the rise of the Vatican, the power shift. In 476 AD, something strange happened. The Western Roman Empire, an empire that had ruled for over a millennium, simply ceased to exist. But what if I told you that the fall of Rome wasn't a collapse at all? What if it was the beginning of something far darker than you've been taught? Rome, once the most powerful empire in history, didn't just crumble under the weight of barbarian invasions or internal decay. Instead, it quietly surrendered, its fate sealed by a series of mysterious events. We're told that the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Odoacer, a barbarian general, a simple coup, an empire's end. But in the records, there is no mention of grand wars, no fiery battles between Romans and invaders, no declarations of the empire's death. Just silence. How could such an influential empire simply fall without any true record of its collapse? Why was the moment that signaled the end of an era left so eerily empty? What was left behind was not the chaos of war, but an unsettling stillness, a silence that history books have conveniently overlooked. The silence surrounding Rome's fall isn't just an oversight, it's a signal, a clue to something deeper, something that those in control of history want us to ignore. For centuries, historians have accepted the narrative that the Western Roman Empire fell into chaos and decay, that the barbarian invasions were the final straw. But what if the truth is far more insidious? What if those who benefited from Rome's collapse weren't simply foreign invaders, but the very ones who controlled knowledge and power in the empire's twilight? Rome's disappearance wasn't catastrophic, it was planned. A controlled demolition of a world order, orchestrated by those who saw the writing on the wall and understood the power that came with controlling history. The collapse of Rome wasn't the end of an empire. It was the beginning of a carefully engineered shift in power, one that would see knowledge, power, and authority placed in the hands of an institution far different from the Senate or the legions. Rome didn't fall with a roar, it fell with a whisper so loud that it still echoes through the corridors of history. And yet, what followed this whisper? A profound silence that, for centuries, went unquestioned. The truth is, the aftermath of Rome's collapse is largely undocumented. When historians speak of the Dark Ages, they speak of a time of darkness not only in the sense of intellectual decay, but in the absolute absence of records. Where are the documents, the chronicles, the records from the time? The Western Roman Empire didn't just fall, it vanished from history. For a period that spanned centuries, the Western world was left in the dark. This gap in the historical record is no accident. The lack of evidence following Rome's fall isn't a quirk of history, it's a deliberate cover-up. What was erased during this period is far more significant than the events of the collapse itself. The silence that followed Rome's fall hides an even darker truth, the rise of a new power that would reshape the world in ways that are still felt today. Why does the fall of the empire vanish without a trace? Why are the most critical years of the early Middle Ages so poorly documented? These are questions that have been conveniently ignored by those who controlled the narrative. The fall of Rome was only the beginning. What followed was the rise of something far more dangerous, a power so immense that it still holds sway over us today. But it wasn't an empire that took control. It was something far more insidious. What most historians fail to recognize is that the real power shift wasn't in the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but in what came next, the rise of the Church. From the ruins of Rome, a new empire emerged, not built on military conquest, but on the control of knowledge, belief, and history itself. The Church didn't just take over the spiritual lives of Europe, it took control of Europe's intellectual foundation, rewriting the history of the ancient world and erasing any trace of Roman achievement that threatened its authority. The early medieval period wasn't one of ignorance, it was one of censorship. It wasn't a time of darkness, it was a time of controlled light, a light that only the Church was allowed to illuminate. For centuries, those in power understood the greatest truth of all: who controls history, controls the future. And in this new world order, it was the Church that not only controlled the narrative, but selectively buried the parts of history that threatened its reign. But if the Church was the architect of this new world order, what secrets did they bury to maintain their power? What truths were lost in the silence following Rome's fall? And more importantly, who were the men behind the veil, pulling the strings of history to suit their vision? Stay with us as we begin to unravel the web of deception and uncover the true story behind Rome's fall, a story that has been hidden for centuries. The fall of the Roman Empire is one of history's most famous events. But what you haven't been told is what came after the fall, because what rose from the ashes wasn't a kingdom. It was a system that controlled memory itself. The church, a persecuted sect, soon became the most powerful institution in Europe. But how? How did a faith founded in humility and sacrifice become the ruler of Europe's intellectual and political destiny? The world assumed that after the fall of Rome, Europe would descend into chaos. Barbarian hordes would flood the continent, and intellectual life would cease to exist. But instead of chaos, something different happened. The Vatican, with its cloistered monks and shadowy hierarchies, stepped into the void. They didn't just fill the gap left by Rome, they redefined it, rewriting the rules of power, knowledge, and memory. In those early centuries, the church wasn't just an institution of faith, it was a last bastion of control over knowledge. Rome had its libraries, its archives, its public debates. After its fall, who held that power? The Vatican. From this vault of knowledge, the church began to craft a narrative, one where its influence wasn't just spiritual but intellectual, political, and historical. But the question remains, how did they make this leap from persecution to power? The rise of the Vatican wasn't a miracle. It wasn't divine intervention. It was a carefully constructed agenda, carried out in silence. The question isn't how the church gained power, it's why. Why were they allowed to rise, and what were they hiding from the world? How did they manage to bury the ancient knowledge of Rome and replace it with their own narrative? And how much of what we've been taught has been deliberately shaped to serve their purpose? The power shift was no accident. It's not just that the church became the dominant force, it's that the church became the authority on history. They didn't just preserve the past, they rewrote it. By controlling knowledge, the church controlled memory. And with that power, they controlled the future. But what if they weren't just preserving ancient knowledge? What if they were erasing parts of it? What if history, as we know it, was deliberately manipulated by those who controlled the most sacred texts in Europe? For centuries, the Vatican controlled the flow of information, preserving only what fit their narrative. But the records, the true history, much of it was locked away, hidden in vaults under the guise of sacred truth. What happened to all the knowledge of the ancients? The mathematical theories, the scientific discoveries, the political philosophies? Why were these works, many of them essential to understanding the rise of Rome and the fall of empires, erased from the records? The real power wasn't in the church's ability to dictate belief. It was in its ability to control what was remembered. For years, scholars and monks in the service of the Vatican held the keys to the ancient world's greatest intellectual treasures. But as they copied manuscripts and translated texts, they also rewrote them. History was altered. Books that contradicted the church's teachings vanished. Some were burned, but others were simply buried. Lost to time, erased from the collective memory of Europe. Why would the Vatican, the guardian of faith, need to rewrite history? Why not let the ancient knowledge stand? The answer is simple: control. When you control history, you control the future. The power to shape the narrative is the ultimate power. But what was really hidden in the vaults? What did the Vatican want to bury, and why? It's not just about what was lost, it's about what was never allowed to see the light of day. The Vatican's manipulation of history wasn't a simple matter of protecting the faith. It was about rewriting the very foundation of civilization. The church controlled the narrative of the past, and with it, the power to dictate the future. But what happens when the truth starts to seep through the cracks? What happens when those forgotten records are unearthed? What does the Vatican fear will be uncovered? Stay with us, because the real story of the Vatican's rise to power and the secrets they've kept hidden for centuries is just beginning. The myth of the Dark Ages, how history was erased. We've been told that the Dark Ages was a time of intellectual decay, but what if the truth is even darker than that? What if everything you've been taught about this period was designed to make you believe in an empty, void-like past? The Dark Ages, an era defined by its supposed ignorance, superstition, and cultural collapse. This is the story we've all learned, and it's a narrative that has shaped our view of history. But is that all it is? Just a story? Or is the truth far more sinister? History books and films have painted the fall of Rome as the moment when Western civilization came to a screeching halt. But what if Rome's decline wasn't the end of knowledge, but the beginning of something far more manipulative? The idea that Europe plunged into a dark age is a myth, carefully woven by the very hands that stood to benefit from erasing the true story. What if the fall of Rome was not a collapse, but a strategic erasure, a clean slate carefully crafted by those who knew that in order to control the future, they had to control the past? The so-called Dark Ages weren't dark at all. They were deliberately concealed, swept under the rug by those who needed history to be rewritten. What we thought was lost was never lost at all. It was hidden by design. The term Dark Ages was coined to describe a time when Europe supposedly lacked innovation, when no intellectual or cultural advances occurred. But what if, instead of silence, this was a period of profound, hidden brilliance? What if the breakthroughs that would have defined an entire civilization were deliberately buried in vaults, locked away from the public eye? What if the truth was much more unsettling than we could have imagined? That these centuries were not marked by ignorance, but by a deliberate and systematic repression of knowledge? Evidence has surfaced that suggests breakthroughs were made during these centuries, advancements that could have changed the course of history. But instead of celebrating these ideas, they were suppressed, and not just by natural forces, but by those who had the power to control the narrative. The Dark Ages weren't about what was lost. It was about what was kept hidden. Scientific advancements, artistic creations, and intellectual discoveries were unfolding during this period. But here's the real question. Why wasn't this knowledge shared with the world? Why was it suppressed, erased, or completely ignored? Was the Dark Ages really about darkness, or were the lights just intentionally turned off? What we're taught about this time period is incomplete. In fact, much of what we know to be true is constructed. For centuries, the people living during the so-called Dark Age were not trapped in a stagnant void. They were advancing in ways that should have rewritten the textbooks. Think about this. Why didn't we hear about their breakthroughs at the time? From mechanical inventions to astronomical advancements, from farming techniques to architectural marvels, Europe during the Dark Ages wasn't stagnant. It was laying the foundation for the Renaissance. But these discoveries were hidden from the world. Why? Who controlled this narrative? Why didn't these advancements see the light of day? The answers lie not in the fall of Rome, but in what happened after the fall: a strategic blackout, a cover-up, and a carefully constructed historical amnesia. The breakthroughs of the so-called Dark Ages have been dismissed as relics of an uncivilized time. But what if we told you that some of the most advanced minds of the era were not only operating ahead of their time, but were silenced to keep their knowledge from ever reaching the masses? There were revolutions in thought happening during the Dark Ages, in technology, medicine, agriculture, and even philosophy. These weren't the times of backwardness we've been led to believe. Records exist that document significant achievements, things we've never been taught. Why were these documents hidden? Why were these discoveries buried under layers of historical rewriting? You've been taught that the Renaissance was the beginning of intellectual and artistic rebirth, but perhaps instead, the Renaissance was nothing more than the unearthing of lost knowledge. Knowledge that was buried so deeply in the Dark Ages that it could only surface once it was safe to do so. Why? Because those in power had to ensure that their monopoly on the story remained intact. We've seen how these dark ages were painted as an era of nothingness. But the truth isn't just hidden, it's suppressed. The real story of the Dark Ages isn't one of ignorance. It's one of strategic erasure. The next chapter will reveal the incredible discoveries that were locked away and the forces responsible for keeping them out of the history books. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you thought you knew about history, your understanding of time itself, has been fabricated. 1,000 years of human history, lost, invented, or worse, created from nothing. Welcome to the phantom time hypothesis, the theory that could rewrite everything you thought you knew about the past. What if the entire timeline of human history, as we understand it, is a carefully constructed illusion? What if entire centuries were simply added to history, centuries that never existed? This is the unsettling possibility raised by the phantom time hypothesis. The idea is simple yet deeply disturbing. Certain periods of history, roughly 297 years between the 7th and 10th centuries, may never have actually happened. This theory challenges the very foundation of our past, suggesting that the events, dates, and people we think we know were created, not discovered. But how would this be possible? And more importantly, who would have the power to make such a monumental alteration to our collective memory? Discrepancies in historical records, anomalies in astronomical observations, and missing documents from entire centuries all point to something far deeper. But here's the question. What if this was more than just a mistake? What if these gaps were deliberately engineered? Historians have long puzzled over the strange inconsistencies in the timeline of the early Middle Ages. Missing records, lost manuscripts, and accounts that don't add up. Why would entire centuries have disappeared from the historical record? Perhaps the answer lies not in ignorance or accident, but in intentional manipulation. Modern astronomers have discovered discrepancies in the recorded positions of stars and eclipses from this period, events that don't align with the actual movement of celestial bodies. The dates, it seems, have been adjusted. But to what end? The timeline of history as we know it isn't just flawed. It's edited. The evidence is there. But the truth is far more unsettling than we've been led to believe. Could this be an attempt to create a controlled, sanitized version of history? One where the truth of the past could be reshaped to serve the needs of those in power? The records of the past should be our greatest tools for understanding. But what happens when they've been altered to fit a specific narrative? And how could such an alteration go unnoticed for centuries? What if the events we believe to be true, the dates, the rulers, the wars, and the revolutions, were intentionally planted into history? If time itself was a weapon, how would we even know the truth? The past is a mirror, but what if the reflection has been manufactured? What if this isn't a simple miscalculation, but a deliberate decision to fabricate an entire period of time? Could it be that the people in power, whether kings, popes, or scholars, had a vested interest in crafting a narrative that placed them at the center of history? The idea of the phantom time hypothesis isn't just about missing time, it's about constructed time. The theory suggests that key moments in history were inserted, carefully plotted, and engineered to give certain powers a legitimate, uninterrupted claim to authority. But the question remains, why? What if the centuries between 614 and 911 AD were manipulated for a specific reason, a reason that has remained hidden from us for centuries? What if everything we've been told about the rise of Europe, the birth of the Renaissance, and the foundation of modern civilization is wrong? What if these monumental events are nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, a narrative that's been edited, revised, and erased from the records? Stay with us, because the truth about our history is just beginning to surface, and what we uncover next will make you question everything. Hidden knowledge. The Vatican's secret archive. Deep beneath the Vatican, hidden from the world's gaze, there lies a secret. A secret so powerful that it could rewrite everything you thought you knew about the past. For centuries, access has been denied, doors locked, and the key guarded. But what lies beyond those gates? What are they hiding, and why? What could these ancient manuscripts reveal that has been kept from us for so long? The Vatican's secret archives, an enigma, an impenetrable fortress of knowledge and power. We've been told they contain relics of faith, ancient biblical manuscripts, and the personal journals of popes. But is that really all? Or is there something far more dangerous hidden within those walls? For centuries, access to the archives has been restricted to a handful of scholars and Vatican insiders. Even those who've been granted access are forbidden from revealing what they've seen. But we know this: the Vatican has controlled more than just religion. They've controlled history. And within the vaults, there may be documents so powerful, so dangerous, they could shatter the accepted story of the past. The question is, why keep it hidden? What is it about these documents that the Vatican doesn't want the world to see? Behind closed doors, the Vatican guards knowledge that could change the course of history. Fragments of ancient texts, hidden political secrets, and documents that reveal the truth behind the rise of the Church. But there's something more, something far more explosive hidden inside. These archives are not simply a repository for religious texts. The documents within them contain the very fabric of human history: ancient political treaties, suppressed scientific discoveries, and artifacts that may just contradict the official version of events. What of the very records that shape our understanding of the past, our civilization, have been deliberately concealed? And the most shocking part? These documents could reveal that the Church's control over knowledge wasn't just about religion, it was about rewriting history itself. What if these records expose that the Church's rise to power wasn't just divine providence, but a calculated effort to shape history and suppress anything that threatened its narrative? There are records that hint at forgotten inventions, buried treaties, and even the names of people and places that have been erased from the history books. Yet these documents were hidden, locked away, perhaps for centuries, in an effort to control the narrative. Whispers among those who've had the privilege, or curse, of peering into the vaults speak of documents that could completely rewrite the rise of Christianity in the West. Among them are treaties and texts that have never seen the light of day. But the most startling revelation? These records contradict the established story of the Church's ascension to power. Were the ancient civilizations as lost as we've been taught? What if we've been led to believe that the fall of Rome was an abrupt ending when, in fact, it was a carefully crafted transition, a transition in which the Vatican played a pivotal role in controlling both memory and history? The Church didn't just preserve knowledge, it filtered it. But the true purpose of this control is just starting to emerge. Inside these vaults, the Vatican hides documents that challenge the official timeline of history. There are maps of the world that were thought to be centuries ahead of their time. There are books of science, medicine, and astronomy that predate the Renaissance. but the truth is locked away in a vault deeper than any we've dared to imagine. These documents aren't just religious relics. They contain suppressed knowledge that contradicts mainstream historical understanding. Ancient maps of the world that reveal a global knowledge of geography that shouldn't have been possible at the time. The writings of scientists and philosophers whose work should have been celebrated, not hidden. And even more shocking, manuscripts that suggest the Roman Empire's fall wasn't an event at all, but a manufactured narrative. What if these records show that history was intentionally altered to serve the ambitions of those in power? What if they tell us that we're living in a timeline constructed by those who controlled the flow of knowledge? The Vatican's archives hold the keys to understanding our true past. But what happens when we begin unlocking those doors? What will we find? History's greatest secrets aren't just hidden, they've been protected. And the next chapter in this story may reveal truths that some would kill to keep buried. Stay tuned, because the truth is about to be unearthed. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about the past is not a series of accidents, but a deliberate fabrication, a tightly controlled narrative designed to keep the truth buried? What if the very institutions that shaped our world have been doing more than just guiding our faith? They've been controlling what you believe about your history. For centuries, the church didn't just reign over the faithful, it held dominion over knowledge itself. Intellectual life, political power, even the flow of scientific progress, all were under the control of an institution that knew the value of controlling memory. The church didn't just tell people what to believe spiritually, it told them what to believe about the past. Consider this. History is not just a list of events. It's a tool of power. When you control history, you control everything. The past shapes the present, and the present shapes the future. And for over 1,000 years, the church understood this better than anyone else. But here's the real question. What would the church want to hide? What stories were erased from our collective memory? And more disturbingly, why was it so critical for them to control these narratives? What if the loss of knowledge wasn't an accident? What if the suppression of science, philosophy, and political dissent was deliberate? What if they erased key events from history because those events didn't serve their agenda? The history we know is a carefully curated selection of truths, designed not to inform, but to control. The idea that the church, an institution of faith, could have played a hand in shaping history itself is a shocking thought. But what if the real story isn't about lost knowledge, but about knowledge that was never allowed to surface? What if certain historical events weren't just forgotten, but intentionally buried because they didn't fit the narrative of power? What if we've been taught to believe in a version of history that serves those who have always had the upper hand, an upper hand that was solidified by the erasure of certain truths, the suppression of knowledge, the destruction of libraries, and the control of texts? These were not mistakes of the past. They were strategic decisions. The church didn't just control faith, they controlled memory. What if, for centuries, the church didn't just preserve documents, it selectively erased the ones that told the wrong story? What if they didn't just suppress heresy in the name of God, but suppress the entire truth of our history in the name of power? There are real consequences to controlling memory. Knowledge is not just information, it is power. But what were they afraid of? Why was it so crucial for the church to hide certain texts, certain truths, and certain perspectives? Imagine this, texts that revealed an entirely different understanding of the rise of Christianity, documents that questioned the church's very foundations, maps of the ancient world that contradicted the church's teachings. What if the truth was hidden not for the sake of religion, but for the sake of the church's monopoly on power? The fact that so much knowledge has been buried, destroyed, or hidden should make us question the very foundations of the history we've been taught. And yet the most shocking part is that even today, the church's grip on historical memory remains just as strong as ever. History is not what we've been taught. It is not the linear progression we've learned in schools. What if we've been living with a fabricated history, one that has been manipulated and edited to keep us under control? Stay tuned, because the truth about what's been hidden, about the knowledge erased, is more explosive than anything we've ever been told. The Renaissance, a rediscovery or a controlled awakening? In the ashes of 1,000 years of intellectual darkness, Europe suddenly bursts into light. The Renaissance, a time when the dawn of human knowledge and progress was heralded as the ultimate triumph over ignorance. But what if the true genesis of this explosion wasn't the discovery of knowledge, but a calculated release? What if the Renaissance wasn't a new beginning at all, but the first chapter in a carefully crafted story that has yet to be fully told? The Renaissance, an intellectual revolution, the rediscovery of classical texts, the sudden emergence of Renaissance art, the scientific discoveries that redefine the known world. Historians have taught us to believe that this period was an organic burst of creativity, but what if the reality is far more sinister? Imagine this: centuries of intellectual stagnation, where knowledge was suppressed and questions were forbidden. Then, almost overnight, the floodgates open. But was this sudden flourishing of ideas truly a product of genius minds rebelling against the status quo? Or was it part of a grander plan, a carefully engineered unveiling of the knowledge that had been hidden, not lost, for generations? The question you need to ask is, who controlled this release, and why? As artists like Leonardo da Vinci began their masterpieces, and thinkers like Copernicus dared to challenge the cosmos, ideas that had been kept dormant for centuries began to surface. But where did these ideas really come from? Were they truly rediscovered, or were they simply allowed to resurface at the most opportune moment? The sudden explosion of Renaissance brilliance was unlike anything Europe had seen before. Ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, thought lost to the ages, was resurrected. Philosophers, scientists, and engineers began to push the boundaries of what was possible, but who gave them the tools? Could it be that the very minds we credit with rediscovering science and art had access to a body of knowledge preserved far earlier than we've been told? Was the Renaissance truly a spontaneous return to the classics? Or were these ideas carefully curated and slowly introduced by those who had the power to shape them? This wasn't the beginning of knowledge. It was a calculated release of knowledge. But what was the hidden agenda behind the timing of this explosion? What if, tucked away in ancient texts and scrolls, lies knowledge that could have changed the course of human history even before the Renaissance? Hidden manuscripts that the church kept under lock and key until they deemed it time for them to resurface? The Renaissance wasn't just a period of rediscovery. It was a strategic unveiling of knowledge. The church controlled knowledge for centuries, and even when the Renaissance thinkers claimed to find ancient works, what if these texts were released under the watchful eye of the church? What were they really allowing to surface? Was it only knowledge that served their agenda, or did they release certain advancements to quell growing dissent against their authority? The scientific principles, the theories of the cosmos, the innovations in art, all of these ideas had been present in some form long before the Renaissance. What was the church hiding, and why now? Could it be that the true story of the Renaissance is a story of control, a carefully managed narrative about who gets to decide what humanity learns? For centuries, the church kept certain truths hidden in their vaults. But when did they decide it was time to release the truth? Was the Renaissance truly a sudden awakening of human intellect? Or was it a controlled unveiling aimed at strengthening an intellectual monopoly over the Western world? Behind the scenes, the church wasn't just suppressing knowledge. They were strategically releasing it, shaping how it reached the people. The truth about the rise of scientific thought, the development of art, the birth of modern philosophy, it wasn't about spontaneous genius. It was a carefully controlled introduction of new ideas designed to reshape the trajectory of Europe and the world. But why? Why would the church allow such ideas to surface after centuries of suppression? What was their ultimate goal? The pieces of the puzzle are slowly being uncovered, but the final picture remains hidden for now. The Renaissance, for all its brilliance, is only part of the story. What we've been taught is just the beginning. There's more, much more, hidden in the archives and locked in ancient texts. Stay tuned, because the next chapter will reveal the untold secrets about how history itself was manipulated, how knowledge was controlled, and how the Renaissance was a calculated step in the church's long game to hold power. You won't believe what we uncover next. The secret societies, knowledge in the shadows. What if I told you that the greatest historical secrets are not locked in vaults or buried in ancient ruins, but hidden in plain sight, protected by those who understand the true power of knowledge? The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, two of the most secretive societies in history, whose true influence has never been fully understood. But their role in shaping our world goes far beyond what you've been told. These groups, shrouded in secrecy and mystery, have been the subject of countless conspiracy theories. But what if the real story isn't about rituals or power, but about something far more dangerous? These societies were the unseen guardians of knowledge, the protectors of ancient wisdom that the world wasn't ready to receive. The church was not the only power vying for control of history. There were those working in the shadows, keeping knowledge alive, even in the face of danger. The Freemasons and the Rosicrucians didn't just practice rituals. They were the keepers of truths that could have reshaped the course of history. But what truths? What if they weren't just preservers of forgotten manuscripts, but the silent architects of change, controlling the flow of ideas and shaping world events from behind the scenes? What if I told you that the true reason these secret societies were so feared wasn't because of their power or wealth, but because of their role as custodians of forbidden knowledge? Knowledge that, if revealed, would have completely shattered the foundations of the world as we know it? For centuries, the church and the political elite have controlled the flow of knowledge. But behind this facade, there were others. Those who quietly ensured that certain information was preserved, even when the rest of the world forgot. The Renaissance, widely celebrated as a sudden explosion of intellectual freedom, may have been part of a larger plan. A plan carefully orchestrated by secret societies to slowly release knowledge that had been suppressed for centuries. What if the true purpose of these secret groups wasn't to amass wealth or power, but to act as the last line of defense for the preservation of knowledge that would have threatened the very foundations of authority? The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, they weren't just preserving knowledge, they were controlling its release, ensuring that the right ideas were made available at the right time. But how did they decide which knowledge would be shared, and why? As powerful as the church was, it couldn't control everything. Beneath its influence, hidden in plain sight, these secret societies operated, preserving knowledge that could have rewritten history. But how did they manage to protect this forbidden wisdom without being detected? How far did their influence really go? In the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe was experiencing a rapid intellectual awakening, one that was fueled not only by the rediscovery of classical texts, but by a resurgence of esoteric knowledge. Some of the most influential Renaissance thinkers were tied to secret societies, from Da Vinci to Galileo. But their involvement in these groups has been downplayed or outright ignored by history. What was really going on behind closed doors during the Renaissance? These societies didn't just protect knowledge, they shaped history, ensuring that certain ideas were passed down while others were buried. Did they work with the church or against it? Were they co-conspirators in the larger game of controlling knowledge? Or were they the rebels, quietly defying the Vatican's monopoly over intellectual life? These questions remain unanswered, but as we continue, the hidden actions of these societies will become clearer. And the truth is even more shocking than you can imagine. What if the true battle for knowledge wasn't fought with armies or politics, but with the very ideas that shape civilization? Could the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other secret societies have been the last bastion of knowledge, fighting to ensure the truth wasn't wiped out by those who had the power to shape history itself? The biggest cover-up, a world of hidden truths. What if history itself, as we know it, is nothing but a carefully crafted illusion, a narrative engineered to keep us in the dark about the real forces that shape the world? The truth has always been there, buried not in the ruins of lost civilizations, but hidden in the very records that were supposed to guide us. The documents that would have rewritten history, those that were too dangerous, too powerful, have been hidden in plain sight. The real story of human civilization has always been there, locked away, protected by the very institutions we trust to tell us the truth. History's biggest cover-up isn't about the missing records or the lost texts. It's about the manipulation of the human mind itself. The story has never been about what was lost, but what has been deliberately hidden by those who have shaped the very narratives of our world and who hold dominion over the future. What if the real key to understanding history is not in what we've been told, but in what has been left out? The church wasn't alone in controlling history. Political powers, monarchies, even secret societies, all played a role in shaping the world as we know it. The world we've been taught to understand is a carefully curated version of events, shaped to ensure that a select few maintain control over the narrative, and, ultimately, the power. But if history is a weapon, one that can be used to shape the future, then what are we still being kept in the dark about? What truth remains buried, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally uncover it? The biggest question is not what's been erased, but who is still controlling the story. The truth is more dangerous than we realize. And as we peel back the layers of deception, we realize that the world we thought we knew is just one version of the story, a story still being written today. The real battle has only just begun. The full truth has not been revealed, and the question remains, what are we prepared to do with it when we finally find it? The greatest lie ever told wasn't about the future, it was about the past. A past that was deliberately altered, shaped and erased by those who held the power to control it. What we've been taught isn't just history, it's a script, a carefully constructed narrative designed to protect the few and suppress the truth from the masses. But what else has been hidden from us? What if, hidden beneath the layers of forgotten civilizations and erased histories, there lies the untold story of what truly happened? The story that powerful figures, secret organizations, and entire institutions don't want you to know. It's not just about the past being buried. It's about the ongoing manipulation of knowledge, written by the victors who never wanted the world to know the truth. The use of psychological manipulation in history goes far beyond merely erasing inconvenient truths. Entire histories have been reshaped, sanitized, and packaged to serve the narrative of those who wish to control the world. What we call the Dark Ages wasn't an era of ignorance. It was a manufactured void, a period of selective amnesia designed to weaken humanity's connection to its own past. The Renaissance, hailed as a new age of enlightenment, was nothing more than a calculated release of knowledge, timed to coincide with a larger political agenda. But what was the real reason this knowledge was hidden? And who decided when we were ready for the truth? But even as we reveal the secrets hidden for so long, there is one question that still remains unanswered. What truths are still locked away, undiscovered, forgotten, or deliberately concealed, waiting to be uncovered? The secret archives of the Vatican, the lost libraries of Alexandria, the coded manuscripts hidden in the vaults of secret societies, all of these are just fragments of a much larger story. As we uncover more, we must ask ourselves, what is still being kept from us today? This is only the beginning. The truths we've uncovered are just a glimpse into the hidden history of our world. And in the upcoming episodes, we will explore more stories, forgotten empires, suppressed ideologies, and lost knowledge that could rewrite the history of humankind. Stay tuned because the real history has yet to be revealed. History, as we've been taught, is a carefully orchestrated illusion. But how many more illusions are we living under today? What other truths could be just beyond our reach, hidden in the vaults of power? The only question now is, will we continue to accept the lies? Or will we finally begin to question everything we've been told? Thank you for joining us on this eye-opening journey through history's most hidden truths. But this is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of the stories that have been erased, the mysteries waiting to be uncovered. So if you want to keep exploring the secrets of the past and unravel the cover-ups that shaped our world, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support is the key to uncovering more of these untold stories. If you've learned something new or feel the urge to share what you've discovered, like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts or theories, and share it with those who deserve to know the truth. We're just getting started, and we need your help to spread these hidden histories far and wide.